us through my times. Did CISSP in 98. I recertified twice, and it was a good experience all round and valuable at the time, I found, until I started running into more and more sales guys that had it, and at that point I kind of put it aside, retained the knowledge, but sort of moved on from there. I've been certified on most of the commercial firewall platforms at one time or another. So like referencing, as I was saying to Sean there, back to the days of being a checkpoint instructor in the very early days when it was essentially either Maxon or BRAC that you would have bought from essentially. I was a BRAC instructor as part of that group. And occasionally speak at these sort of things and do some book reviews for some folks along the way, like if any one of you have done the SANS IDS conference and then bought Stephen's books afterwards, or stuff that Stephen and Judy put together, I had a hand in reading through some of that stuff and offering some pointers. So been around a bit, so that's good. Quick point, it's kind of an obvious question, but what is a firewall? Quick thing there. In the simplest form, they're really just a decision point, right? They're an entry point, decision point, some logical control that we input that decides whether data will or won't pass a certain place. Right? Common, it's a zone in the network that we want to enforce something on, and this is the technologies that do it. It's a security gateway we employ that does this for us. The key thing, and this is the thrust of the talk, is that they, as a security technology, are as relevant today as when they were first introduced back in the very early 90s. Something that we pay attention to, and it's through innovation that we've been able to keep this as a primary function and focus. In terms of innovation, of course, it's a logical place to innovate, and innovation has really come from two different forks. We've seen innovation in the devices themselves, in terms of capacities that they can handle, functions that they can do, and sort of things around that. And we've also seen innovation in what we call firewall helpers, right? So while we had the same firewall structure maybe for 10, 12, 15, 20 years, we had other helper functions that we maybe want to attach to these. For example, at one stage we had maybe ISS Real Secure or something like that as a subsidiary function that was abstracted to this from a security perspective. And over time, those technologies added and grew and grew and grew. Because of the ubiquity of the firewall deployment, though, that has remained the central piece of what we want to do and what we want to look at. I've got graphics along the way, just a little bit of entertainment and what have you. So things, for example, when I talk about the history of the firewall market space and specifically commercial structure, what we've done, sort of starting from the rabbit stick sort of version of, a defensive or offensive weapon, and progressing down the charts, obviously, as we've gone through time. So really, when you look at the firewall market, you look at early days, back to things like the firewall daemon FWD that you would potentially invoke on early Unix systems. The first iteration of BSD had that as a core function there, which would allow processes to talk to each other. Looked at beyond that to things like TIS Toolkit and the evolution of that into a commercial product through the gauntlet structure, etc. Borderware 1.0 back in the day. So this is all the very early sort of iterations of firewalling, where people really understanding what is it that can do for us, why would we need one of these things. So this is a lot of this time, there was very few enterprises that really embraced this. And I'll put that in context from my personal perspectives. At the time, looking at that sort of time frame that I put up there, 92 to 94, I was living in South Africa. I'd just finished, I'd sort of got out of the army. I was involved in computing. Security was always a focus for me, and I got involved in firewalling right from the start, fortunately, from some of that military background. And at the time, the military in SA was the only place in the country that had bothered to firewall anything. Right, the rest of it was all wide open. It was just, kind of nobody just expected that anyone would care. And to give you more context at the time, for the whole country of South Africa, we had two 256K links that went external. We had an East Coast one and a West Coast one. So in terms of data transfers and what have you, people really didn't care. It was like, who gave it to us? So moving on from that, you see those first iterations of product. Obviously, as the network started to grow and we get into more network structure, server and PC growth exploded. You get to those years 95 and on, Borderware 2.0 came out. Right, they added RAN, Zach Horizon's Z-Mailer into that thing, which made it a tremendously popular platform. Still in there today in the guise that it is today, a tremendously effective platform. You looked at things like Gauntlet 2.0, Sidewinder came out. So this is really the proxy world. This is where people recognize we can deploy this technology. Take the Borderware example, we'll load up these disks onto a PC of your construct, and we'll physically segment things. We'll pass things through, we'll proxy through, we'll take them right up through the stack. We'll hand over the data, we'll reconstruct the packets on the other side and send these things through. Right, Sidewinder in its current guise, the Gauntlet and Sidewinder are kind of melded together now as the G2 firewall. They like to use the analogy of the submarine structure, right, where if one of those pieces fails, or I can subvert one of those pieces in the structure, we don't sink the ship. Right, fantastic technology, still in use today. A lot in government and banking and finance, people still want a proxy function within their structure, so it still has validity. The key thing for those, and the key reason why stateful inspection eclipsed this whole technology, was when you do a proxy like that, the processing overhead that's associated with deconstructing every packet and reconstructing it on the other side becomes enormous. So when I was constructing, for example, when CH Television in Toronto put their first firewall in place, it was a border-away firewall we built for them on a kick-ass PC, and literally this thing took their 10 meg network down to 1.5 meg. Right? Fortunately for them, it wasn't as big of a deal because they were doing less than that in processing, but the firewall as a bottleneck was a real issue in the proxy world. Right? And for that reason, you saw folks develop the new sort of technologies around the stateful inspection approach. Right? The stateful inspection approach doesn't reconstruct the packet, it essentially validates the initial communication, holds it in a state table saying, I know this communication, I've seen this before, and I'm accepting this, and the subsequent packets essentially get sort of a liberal quick pass, and they're sent on their way. So you saw from 96 onwards, the real ramp up in commercialization of the firewall space. This is where things got interesting. This is where companies started recognizing the earning potential of pushing this as a core function that you needed within your infrastructures. It's at this stage that IT security really started taking off. Because prior to that, we'd had a lot of interest in terms of security, in terms of what could we do at a systems level, how do we segment things off or sort of blind them from each other so that we don't have overruns, etc. And there's a lot of talk about secure coding and all these sort of things. And you see the instance in '98 when Robert Morris's worm took off and ripped up a lot of people's lovely networks because they were completely unprotected. Stuff happened, some of it even by accident, just because the systems really weren't sort of segmented or secure from each other. And so the concept in the firewall world that stateful inspection brought was really just the zoning concept. In the proxy world, we had it wasn't called zoning, it was literally like I've got two interfaces on this box. One goes in, one goes out. We go to the stateful inspection world, and one of the things that these clever folks put together was this concept of saying, let's put things into zones. So we're going to have different processing areas, different logically segmented functions that we have within our environment, and we'll map that to the physical device. Right? The key thing with stateful inspection, again, performance, and then the flexibility of having multi-interfaces. So I don't know if anyone in the room still remembers those days, like with you'd have your Sun server, you'd have an Ultra 5, you buy that quad card for it, which is like $1,800, right? Yeah, you spend like $7,000 on the checkpoint code, and you bought the quad card, which cost almost as much as the whole bloody thing, and off you go, and it was like a whole new world. We all loved this stuff, and it could perform at wire speeds, which is, at the time was brilliant. This is good news. So there's a very good reason why that took off, right? And then from there we progressed on, and there was really a period of time in this sort of the history of the firewall market, and I've kind of categorized it loosely as 99 to 2006, where essentially there wasn't a lot of innovation. There was kind of a fallow time where the technologies essentially, sort of shuffled in rotation. People came into the market, people went out, you see stuff come and go. And key things around that was, the only real additions you saw there was functions within the VPN capabilities to add user-level connection directly to the device, so the addition for things like SSL, gateway technology started getting introduced and became interesting. So I use that gateway now as a remote access gateway as well, so if you do away with my old Red Creek or whatever, sort of VPN, my old Aventail or something like that, I can now collapse that function into the firewall function, and again reinforce it as its position as the primary security gateway technology for my environment. And then we saw the prevalence of what was called the UTM, or Unified Threat Management capabilities. And so what this was again recognizing the firewall as that central piece. And rather than having individual segmented firewall helpers as unique discrete boxes running behind this technology, we got into a market where we try to put all those things in, right? We try to sort of glom all those pieces into it and essentially logically run it as a single device. The reality was, and this is where things really fell apart, is we essentially built what we in the industry called like a swim laning technology. We'd have sort of swim lanes of decision, right? So, first lane we do the firewall decision. We like this IP space, talking to that IP space, across these ports, we'll give that a go decision, and we'll hold on for that while we look at the AV, right? Can we check this thing, it's mail message maybe, is there antivirus concerns within here? And if there's not, we'll hold on to that decision while we go to the intrusion detection system. And And so the breakout point with this stuff, with that sort of segmentation of processing, is that our stateful inspection firewall that used to be wonderful and quick suddenly starts crashing, right? And you see that today, right? One of the things I'll talk about in the conclusion is basically caveat emptor, right? It's a dirty marketplace, there's a lot of competition. One of the things you'll see that remains is UTM type functionality today hasn't innovated beyond where it was, right? It's a risky area, you want to be careful about that. And from that, we got to kind of the next phase, right? And that's where you'd see, folks like Checkpoints, I work for Palo Alto Networks, folks like us got more into what's called the next generation firewall market. Some people see it as like the second phase of firewalling, in reality it's like the fourth, right? And that's why I broke out the history as I did. This is like the fourth iteration of what we're doing in terms of the gateway functionality, right? There are people in the room, like I referenced to Sean there, who've had one firewall, it's done a great job for them, they're happy with it, and it's wonderful. So that's very, very good. There are others that have had changes in the industry, change in infrastructure, mergers and acquisitions, various reasons why they would revisit that decision around that key security technology. Right? The next-gen firewalls has really driven a lot of this. Right? And so if we look at that, I like to look at this from the firewall administrator's perspective, right? As FW admin, as the firewall administrator, what do I need to be doing? Right? And the next-gen firewall changed the view, because under the previous sort of iteration, for the last 15 odd years or 20 years, what I would have been doing is I would have been looking at which IP addresses need to talk to which IP addresses and across which ports am I going to allow those. And I may or may not do some secondary or third or tertiary decision around that in terms of AV, IPS, those kind of things. The parameter changes. And so in 2006, 2007, people started realizing we need to get beyond this, right? Stateful inspection has been good, but we need to get beyond that to whatever the next phase is going to be. And specifically, applications started becoming more and more important, right? I've got a slide that supports kind of the thinking here. But really what happened is the application space changed. And we knew this, right? One of the reasons why we got so involved with things like intrusion detection systems is because we recognized that the firewall was wonderful, but people were subverting it. Port 80 wasn't just web traffic. Port 443 wasn't just HTTPS, right? There was all sorts of stuff that we had coming through there that we necessarily weren't aware of. Or we couldn't spend the processing all of the time or the understanding or had a team that could analyze those things that would bring the information out for us. And so necessarily we started looking at the application space. And what happened is people started innovating around this and focusing on how do you enable the applications. Right, so forgetting about the network, forgetting about ports and all that sort of stuff. If I need SAP to cross this boundary from this area of my network to that area of the network, how do I just enable SAP? Right? Or how do I enable someone that's coming into the network from their own device, etc., so that they can access that SAP function? And off we would go. And so the focus changed into the application space. The focus also changed in terms of capabilities and enhancements around how we could do user mappings. And so what came out of that was we look at the applications, we also look at the users that need to have access to those. Right? And again, it's not a NAC argument. It's not like we've got an access control solution that controls what we do inside the environment. This is purely, if I can identify a user or a group of users, how do I give them that application? Right? And of course, once I've done that, how do I validate the content that's transiting this device in my network, or this segment of my network, how do I validate the content is good? Right? That I'm not allowing myself to be, sort of hamstrung or shot down from my own intent here. And so that was kind of the third piece that people recognized. And then again, from the admin's perspective, once I've got all that done, it's fantastic to have these tool sets in my hand. This next generation firewall structure is wonderful, but I've got to be able to show people what's going on. I need to be able to prove it. So when the auditor comes in, or my boss comes in, or the other admins on the team need to understand something. Right? We've got a condition where malware's popped off and we need to track this thing down. If I can't get into the tool set of that gateway and bring that out, well, who cares, right? Because then you're going to start ignoring the thing, right? As soon as it becomes too onerous, you've got too much you have to do in terms of manually filtering things and log scraping and doing analysis on all that stuff. It's crap. You're going to turn away from it. You won't use it. So to simply show that is a critical function or critical piece of that from the admin's perspective. Now, how we got there is really there's two sort of simplistically there's two philosophies around security models. The passive security model says you enable through policy that which you require and you block all else, right? So this is the default deny. This is what we've had for ages. This is a really good model. As long as we can validate what we're seeing, applications, users, etc., IPs, ports, it's all valid, it's great. As long as you can validate those things, we'll have a go or a no-go decision around these things. The other model is the active security model. Now, from a security purist perspective, we probably all think this is probably a better idea, and there's lots of arguments for why it is. But the key to this is you have to block everything first, right? You start from a zero state and you build in what you require. So this, for example, is like your network access control. Right? Nobody gets access to anything. And what I'll do is I'll enable this function for this group of users. And I'll enable it in wireless, and you build that from there so that you strictly control every single piece of your argument until the user has access to what they require. Now the caveat to this is, you need to understand every instance, every facet, every argument, every sub-argument in there, right? So this is the argument for that, or the approach that's taken there is that also known as kill all and let God sort out the rest, right? So we just decimate everything except for those instances that we allow. And invariably, as soon as I've got that in place, there's an exception, or someone else needs, there's a sub-requirement, someone else needs something else, etc. So that model is very unworkable. From the firewall administrator's perspective, that's a nasty way to go, right? Because I need to know everything at every moment. I need to map it out and be sure that it's good, right? So again, back to the next-gen firewall approach and kind of what you want to look at. What we looked at there is enable the applications, enable the users and validate the content. It's a simplistic slide, but if you look at the top there, if I'm allowing Oracle and there's a SQL injection attack within there, not that you would have that within Java as an example or anything on that line, let's validate the user, let's validate the application, but let's block the content, right? So the arguments are fairly straightforward. It's a very easy thing to sort of get your head around and get your mind around this as an approach. Right? And again, the key thing here is that the applications changed, and largely the firewalls didn't. Right? So for a number of years, we had those firewalls as a static sort of construct, minor changes, we do our change controls, put things in place when they were called or required, etc. But largely we just kind of hope for the best. And what the next-gen firewalls have proven, not just ours, but everyone else's, is that when you have that sort of approach, you have that laissez-faire sort of approach to what's going on in the environment, you put a next-gen firewall in behind your existing technology and you're in for a bad day. Right? Your boss is going to be shitting on you for sure. Because there's stuff going on that just blows right through those old firewalls. You can't get away from that. And this is why, right? You're tunneling stuff, there's evasion techniques around SSH, SSL, doing things like port hopping, doing things like, using unusual ports with, UDP injects, things like that. It just blows through the old stuff. So the newer sort of generation, again, that 2006 onwards, really embraces this as an approach. Right? Things to be aware of. Well, the slide didn't quite paint perfectly there, but it's supposed to say beware. One of the other things that's really come out of the industry is you think about those sort of 4 iterations of the technology. There's been a lot of Me Too technologies that have come up, right? So stateful inspection as an innovation, if we look back to those days, was really good. And people very quickly just adopted that as an approach, built their own code around that, had a couple of million lines of code around things, had their own GUI or did things, slightly differently. Kind of threw it out in the market and hoped for the best, right? It was so big of a market that, good enough really was good enough for a lot of people. And I'm going to get to that in one of the slides to come. So, for those past sort of 16 years, you saw a lot of Me Too technologies. What's really interesting about the next-gen firewall market is that there's less of that, right? We're seeing true innovation again. We're seeing people that are coming to the market that are bringing in fresh thought, fresh capability. Things like, you could go out today and you could buy, in theory there's technologies out there. If I want to do 500 gigs, I can buy a 500 gig firewall, right? And that's just tremendous. And in fact, if they can perform as advertised, every data center in the universe should have that thing. It's phenomenal. So, key thing there is, and that's why I put the line up there, is just because someone makes the claim, they can do something. It doesn't always mean that they can, right? Back to the borderware days of old, that was a 10 meg firewall I was supposed to be installing and I got 1.5 out of it, right? And it's just how they are. The more processing we need to do commonly, the more we're giving up, right? So the message there is, and that's why I got the nice little graphic there for once I actually credited where I got it from. You might have bought yourself a T-84 tank with some sort of a missile system on it, but if all you're getting out of it is a guy with a slingshot, yeah, good luck, right? A little bit more beware is you see stuff in the industry which is very interesting. People build stuff thinking that it's It's innovation and we need this. And you have, you look at this sort of stuff in hindsight and you sort of go, wow, I'm not so sure that was so valuable. So basically just because you could build something doesn't always make sense that you would actually have it that way. Examples there, like, there's the recent firewall that came out 3 years ago. In theory, part of the next-gen firewall capabilities. There's no HA. It doesn't have a VPN function, right? It's a singular device. It uses set ports to validate what applications you've got going through that thing. And it's a complete joke, right? But it's out there, and someone's going to buy it. That's fine. You get things like having a separate reporting structure required for that sort of thing. You get things like having the GUI vulnerable to an HTTP overflow attack that's dead simple. I mean, the example, everyone reads security advisories. You saw the stuff that came out on the 9th of October, updated on the 17th about the ASA as an example, right? 11 vulnerabilities, including the fact that you can just basically blow the GUI wide open and run the firewall at will. Bit of an issue, right? Kind of sort of stuff if you look at the guy that's getting his slingshotting himself across the field there, I don't want to be that guy. And amazing but true, you're still going to see organizations and people, they're going to ignore innovation, right? For various reasons, some of them valid, but sometimes perception gets in the way, and people are resistant to change, obviously, right? Change is dangerous because change means I have to do some work, I've got to plan, I've got to test some stuff, I might have to, really spend a weekend and do some cutovers, things like that. I might have to test technology that makes me look bad temporarily. All these sort of things come in, and the perception issues that come into change are specifically the issues of next-gen firewalls. Right? And again, any one technology that you're looking at, change is a part you have to embrace. Because you're moving away from IP ports, you're moving away from simple decision points to applications, users, and content. Right? So the change thing can be very, very difficult for people to get a handle on. Kind of more on that, innovation really takes us away from point solutions, so like those firewall helpers or that UTM type thinking. Commonly in the innovation that we've seen, the on-box technology is really the answer, right? We've seen innovation from ourselves, from the other people in the marketplace, where they've put together structures that look at things from a fresh perspective. Right? Very, very interesting thing that you see within this. And if you've ever seen Nir Zook talk about these sort of things, one of the primary points that he raised that I've just come from 6 years at Juniper. I was at Juniper at the time when I saw him deliver this talk, and I thought it's kind of interesting perspective. Folks that have been in the market 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it would be, have an incentive to keep the status quo, right? Because they can't, they're all public, they can't go to Wall Street and say, we're going to take a year off, give us a sabbatical, we're going to rewrite everything, right? And we're going to rewrite it from the new perspectives on what we need to deliver, and from then on we'll be good, we'll bring it back to market, we're going to sell the shit out of the stuff, it's going to be wonderful, and we'll be a force again, right? Nobody's got that scope, nobody's got that leeway. And so, what happens is, you have to eventually, sort of force yourself to get out there and either write a parallel track of technology, and I was at Juniper, I love NetScreen. I am not a big fan of the SRXs, and, that was a parallel technology. So we had something in place that was bulletproof, lovely, administrators loved it. We put in place another technology that was extremely similar. It was based on a routing platform, and we said to people, you're going to love this, because it's like NetScreen, but just on the routers. And it was completely different. Different administration, different functions, things that didn't work, etc. So, interesting position that you get put into on that. But point solutions, the firewall helpers, HTTP authentication bypass for your GUI, incomplete coding, swim lane technologies, all of these sort of legacy technology issues that you might run into you want to bypass. I like this slide I cached off someone on the internet. You actually can't read again, it is reference where it's from. But the story there is, be prepared, always have your life jacket and your gardening gloves with you, so you're fully defended. And then the follow-on from that, which is my conclusion, is that life jackets save lives. And it's a little bit gory, but it's that stage of the Friday afternoon, you might forgive me for this one. Message here, though, is that the competition is fierce, right? I'm up here because I represent a vendor, I've got a message that I want to deliver, we've got a commercial product, of course I'm bound by that. I'm hoping that I've been able to talk a little bit broadly about experiences and thoughts and what have you around that. But the competition is fierce and the game is dirty, right? The marketing departments of every one of our organisations that would be sitting in this room as vendors is out to cut everyone else's throat, and Victoria's over there, so she knows what I'm talking about, right? Technology is excellent, and the ability to innovate within that is key. But don't just take the company's word for what you see within there, right? Some firms are way better at doing the marketing stuff than doing the innovation. Right, again, like the reference in there, I can have a 500 gig firewall, but if I turn on certain features, I go down to like 8 gigs. There's a little credibility gap in that statement, right? You know, it's kind of like, okay, we've gone from marketing to pure fantasy in one easy go there. So from that, kind of the conclusion I'm offering there is always test all of the claims that are made. You know, again, I look at some of the technology I've been involved with over times. You know, like again, back to the Borderware days where it was a 10 gig firewall, sorry, a 10 meg firewall that really could do 1.5 at best. You know, looking at in terms of technologies, things around central management, things around reporting to SIM technologies, things around the swim laning and the helper functions, and integration between different vendors. You really want to test all of that, right? If that's going to be part of your delivery and you're the admin and you're going to be running this stuff, make sure that it's working the way it's supposed to. I'll give you another example there. Right, I worked for a company that had a technology that in theory could securely communicate a change or an issue state on that firewall securely through to the support center. Right? They had a capability where I could have that device, so I'll lose an interface, right? OSPF flips, I lose an interface. It'll troubleshoot for itself, it'll do a dump file, it'll have that dump file, securely package it up, and SSH or SSL deliver it to the support center. The theory was they'll create a ticket, they'll communicate back to me with some answers because they've got the dump file, they were ahead of the game now. The story's fantastic, and yet I never saw it work. Right? Not in any deployment could we ever get that to work as advertised. You know, so again, sounds wonderful, sounds like innovation. Not so much, right? So just be careful of some of this stuff. The key thing with all of this, and it's not a Palo Alto thing, it's not a checkpoint thing, it's not a Fortinet, it's not a, you know, whatever. Look for innovators that define the new markets, right? And obviously in the ramp-up phase when the technology goes out and, you know, you're customer one, yeah, it's, you know, you're taking a chance. You reach a stage, you reach a critical mass with these technologies. When you look around the room, or you look around your space, like your region, your country, or your industry, and you start seeing a critical mass of people absorbing that technology, adapting it, right? Talk to those people, find out their experiences. What's driven their change for them? Because change is difficult, we all know that, right? So people that have embraced it are guys that you want to have a conversation with, right? And the piece I've got there is I haven't named the company. You have comments like, you know, XYZ company both drives the competitors to react in the firewall market and to move the overall firewall market forward. That's a really good statement. And if you get someone to say something like that about what you're doing, you're kind of on the right track, right? So that brief history, brief synopsis, brief thoughts, that's all that I have for you today. So thank you all very much.